All right, Megan. Well, thanks for joining me here on the leadership interview series. I know you've got a lot on your plate, so carving out some time for me here today, I appreciate it. Um, I'm a big fan of yours, and I want to just kind of start by just getting a read on your journey a little bit, right? I mean, and we've talked in the past, and I still am fascinated by someone who has basically taken over a newspaper and you're building and doing amazing things over there. I think it's incredible. So I'm just going to start off by putting this out to you as just how do you end up in this spot now where you are owning and running a print publication, a newspaper like business news?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I get a lot because I think a lot of people are surprised someone would go into news and to really take time and invest in it. It's an industry that we've talked about for a long time, as people jokingly say, right? Or maybe not jokingly. Maybe I choose to think of it as joking. It is a dying industry, and I think about the fact that it's really more of an evolving industry. It just hasn't fully figured out where it's evolving to yet. So it's a really interesting point because you think about how many things have disrupted, how we consume news, and so that disruption is still happening, and we're still feeling it. So I think there's a very traditional way that you end up being in news and you end up being a publisher of a newspaper. And I think there's probably a less traditional route. And if I could advocate for the less traditional for a second, I will wholeheartedly do that. So I own a business newspaper. So it's a slightly different in that I get to really focus on just business, which is what I'm really passionate about. I grew up around business. I have two very entrepreneurial parents. A father who had, started, grown, and had a successful exit from a business. And my mother was, I think she was actually the first female IT manager for Georgia Pacific.
Oh
So
wow.
a computer programmer as a mom, and then an entrepreneur as a dad, which leads to very fascinating dinner conversation when you're like, wait, and you're eating your whatever spaghetti, and your parents like, hey, we had an interesting HR problem at work today, and do you want to talk about it? I'm like, sure, let's talk about that. So it was almost like having this kind of masterclass in business as a fun foundation. So when I, went into college, I think what's fascinating is every kid rebels in a little bit of a way, and mine was like, yeah, I don't think I'm not going to do business. Business is what my family's done. Like I'm gonna do something totally different. So my idea was to do art history and chemistry. So I actually got three-fourths of the way through a chemistry degree before I decided that was not where I wanted to go. But the idea was originally to do art restoration and conservation, because
Wow.
I really care about history and the preservation of old things. And you might notice a trend at some point. But but that's something I was really, really passionate about. So kind of cut forward, my next step was kind of working in archaeological chemistry space. I don't know if you know this, but I actually was an archaeologist for a little bit.
Oh wow.
Yep. So I dug in Italy for a little bit. And then my degree is actually, I have a master's in Latin and ancient Greek, which is about as practical as it sounds. But it had this really beautiful, what was attractive to me was this really analytical approach to language. And not just thinking of language as this kind of conventional tool that we use every day, but really breaking it down to its foundational building blocks and learning how to express different ideas in different languages, and the roots of what we do and how we think about it. I studied ancient Greek philosophy, which is one of the things that's maybe most unexpectedly come up now as I do news, is this thread into ethics and moral relativism that I studied as a classicist now comes up when I talk about news. But I started getting into classics, and I absolutely loved it, but I started feeling like what I kind of jokingly call a literal pyramid scheme, because sometimes you get to work with pyramids. Um, but it's, you get into this industry and you find out the only avenue is to become a professor. So in this hypothetical universe, you become a professor. So then you get students excited. They get into an industry where they find there's nothing to do except become a professor. So then they become professors, and then they get the next group, and so on. So I hit a point where I wasn't comfortable with the idea that I would be contributing to the growth of an industry that would bring people to it where there's no market for it. So it's saying, hey, there's all these things you could do, and there really wasn't.
Hmm.
So instead, what I did is I elected to leave. I was actually in a PhD program. I elected to leave with my master's, and I moved back to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I started my own business. Um,
Wow.
when you're a classicist and you're trying to figure out what to do next, it's a little interesting, but I did what I call scrapping my degree for spare parts. So I pulled out the things that were useful, the writing, the research, the translation, the editing, the really careful communication. And I was open to writing, editing, and translation business. So we translated to and from 27 different languages. So for a
Wow.
while there, if you wanted to know anyone who did Hungarian, Bulgarian, I think I was one of the only people in the state who had this strange kind of cohort of people around me. And then we did foundational business documents, we did grants, and we did patents. And then we also helped write fiction and nonfiction books.
Wow.
So I was, what do you do with classics? Well, you kind of start figuring out where to go next. Um, so from there, I had that business for a few years, and I had already started to have some kind of ideas about business going into COVID, which was, of course, this great disruptor. Um, but I realized that in how I had kind of structured my business, I built it entirely around myself, and it wasn't going to scale. It was really hard to find somebody who could edit both fiction novels and patents.
Yeah.
That was a very strange, skill set. And I remember reflecting and saying, if I knew what I knew 3 years ago, I would have built this entirely differently. I would have just done something completely different.
Yeah.
So I elected to close down my business, and I kind of said, right industry, wrong entry point. I'm closer to what I think I want to do, but it's not the place I want to start it. So during the pandemic, I actually joined a technology startup in the tabletop role
Wow.
playing game space. So if you know Dungeons and Dragons,
Oh yeah.
yeah. One
Yeah.
of my first marketing campaigns we first did was because they specialized initially, at least, in matchmaking services. So to find somebody who played the style of tabletop role playing game as you did, in this kind of remote digital universe.
No
And
kidding. That's crazy.
it was really cool. And like I said, one of my favorite things was that first marketing campaign was we talked about how it was like eHarmony, but with dragons, which might have been one of my favorite marketing campaigns I've ever
Yeah.
worked on. Because it's very few times, and you'll know this, do you get to talk about dragons?
Right. That's awesome.
It doesn't come up very often, not in a serious conversation. And of course, with
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, it's very serious. It's
Yeah.
it's relatable. Um, so I had this kind of strange experience of coming in a startup at the ground level. I was their first hire after the two co-founders who could not have been more different, even though they're like childhood friends.
Yeah.
One of them is kind of, if you picture a Star Wars nerd who's that's pretty much what you get. He's very lovely, Star Wars nerd.
Yeah.
And then the other was the former All-Pro center for the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh wow.
So if you know
Wow.
Travis Frederick,
Yeah. So you
like it
can't
could
have
not have
that.
been more different.
That's awesome.
And Travis was very regimented, woke up every morning to work out. And Peter stayed up super late. So for like a few years, pretty much Peter would go to bed at 3 a.m. Travis would wake up at 5 a.m. So 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. was the only time my phone wasn't buzzing. I think my husband still has like trauma from this.
Uh,
He's like, "Can you silence your phone?" I'm like, "No, like
that's great.
I might need to answer something." Especially because at the time we were brand new startup and we were already global because the reach
Wow.
of D&D is global.
For
So we
sure.
had people who were messaging us from Germany in the middle of the night. And
Wow.
so you end up answering in the middle of the night. Um, so then we start hitting into kind of where the news is. But I don't know if you have any questions, but I realize a very strange journey from that point. But what will lead us into the news part of it is actually a very unsatisfying media interaction when I was working with that tech startup. I had an interaction that later gave me an indication that there was probably a problem in the industry I might be well positioned to solve.
Hmm.
But before I go into that, do you have anything,
No, this
right?
is
You're
great. I mean, the journey is
taking
amazing.
really in.
No, I love it. I mean, it's yeah. Continue. It's what a journey.
Yeah, it's one of those that it's definitely kind of unexpected, and in the sense that in some ways you never know what's going to be entirely relevant. Um, and that doesn't mean, sometimes it gets labeled as, saying yes to everything, which I don't think is correct, but sometimes it's recognizing that an opportunity might not have the expected outcome that you think it will.
Hmm.
So to see how it can be leveraged broadly instead of just specifically. I'm not one that thinks that you need to say yes to everything. I think as people, so often we're trained to think that, we're not supposed to say no to certain opportunities,
Sure.
and sometimes no is a very powerful word. Recognizing it's good to be choosy because you can't do everything. But if we go into the media experience, so when I was so the tech company is actually called Demiplane. They're wonderful. So very subtle there. They when I was with them, they got a partnership contract with Marvel Entertainment. So
Okay.
Captain America, Iron Man,
Yeah.
uh, Thor, which is usually a big favorite. And it was this really cool project. So the project itself was for Marvel was doing a playtest book in the tabletop role-playing game space. So what they were essentially doing was trying to dip a very articulate toe into this, RPG space. So
Yeah.
you literally play as some of the characters from the Marvel universe. You could play as Rocket, and you could play as Groot if you were, big into Guardians of the Galaxy, and you could play as Captain Marvel, and you could. So it was really interesting. And they were literally sending it out to the public as a, hey, kick the tires, see what you think, give us feedback, test out the mechanics, let us know where the mechanics are weak, any of those things. And what Demiplane was tasked to do was to create a digital tool set for it. So, in a strange, area where you never know what's going to be relevant, I ended up having to learn HTML and CSS coding. I remember having
Wow.
a very strange conversation with my mom, like, I think I get you a little bit better now. Um, because now I've had to do that. But, and now that we've built our own websites and stuff, I still have had to use it, but it was funny. So we had to use those to build these digital books. And these, it was everything from, clickable and like hover text for tooltips and some really cool things. But the idea is that Marvel would get this feedback, and then we would immediately be able to incorporate it into this digital publication, which
Yeah.
could be this evergreen, growing, evolving with the community. So really cool thing. And we had it, which is a really cool story. Like two kids from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the birthplace of D&D,
Oh,
had
wow.
started a tabletop role-playing company that now was partnering with Marvel to work with them on a playtest book that they were iterating on in real time.
That's
That
cool.
is supremely cool.
Yeah, that is very cool.
When it got picked up by the news, it got picked up actually by Forbes, and they did a decent job. It was definitely siloed into just that industry news.
Yeah.
And then it got picked up by a local paper. And nothing against this reporter, who's absolutely wonderful. But it ended up, in trying to create it with a local relevancy, it focused on local game stores.
Hmm.
And at the time, we did nothing with local game stores. And local game stores fill so many different spaces, everything from, card games and board games and strategy games to like painting minis to hosting events to tabletop, like they're not just tabletop role playing. So it was a strange pairing, and it was one that somehow the end sum was that it didn't really highlight what was cool about Demiplane, and it didn't really highlight what was novel about that agreement with Marvel. And so the end result was something that we honestly, I don't think we heard any feedback from that
Wow.
piece on, which is a little disappointing because it's something that we were so passionate about. And you think sometimes if you're passionate enough, that
Yeah.
passion get picked up, and that's not always the case. And around the same time, the owner and publisher of the business news prior to me, whose name is Jerry, had approached me about whether I was interested in purchasing the business news.
Hmm.
And the business news, as a fun fact, was the very first place that I advertised when I had my writing, editing, and translation business.
Oh, wow.
And he remembered me as this editor. And he said, hey, I'm looking to get out around the 20-year mark. Would you have any interest in being the editor of a newspaper? And I think at the time I think he first said, you could be the editor and your husband could run it. And I was like, ooh, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
I love him, but like, that's not going to work. I'm like, yeah, I could run this. But I remember thinking, I had such an experience. We can't have been the only business that didn't feel well served or well captured by kind of local or regional media. And I think so often business gets a short kind of shaft because, they're usually maybe part of they're one section of a paper. You think about over breakfast, you pull out the business section,
Right.
which I actually did this morning. Or, they're kind of tucked in just kind of secretly with everything else, or you have to really hunt for something. And we end up having great, business focused coverage that's global or national, but not always great local business coverage. And I started talking with businesses and I was just, hey, have you experienced this? Like, do you feel like you're getting really kind of well represented by
Hmm.
media, that when they cover you, if they cover you, that they're doing it in a way that suggests that like they understand why you're sharing the thing about your business.
Yeah.
They understand why what you're doing is important and how it's integral. And the classic example I use is, how a groundbreaking isn't really about a groundbreaking, you know. A groundbreaking is a culmination of everything that you did before that. It's all that growth, all that scale, all that capacity building, all that product building, it's all of that that leads to a groundbreaking. And then it's that hope for what the groundbreaking is going to signal, the continued capacity growth, expansion, the impact on the community. It's all of those things. The before and after is the interesting. The groundbreaking is just shovels and
Hmm.
dirt. I mean, really, it's great, but it's heralding in, what's intended to do is herald in this next era of your business. And time and time again, I got the feedback that, yeah, we don't feel like we have much of a voice when it comes to media. We don't really know how to do anything with this. We don't know how to fix this. And then in talking with some regional kind of chamber organizations, I heard things like, we're actually discouraged from sending them anything about ribbon cuttings. We're
Hmm.
discouraged from talking about business openings. We're said pretty much it's a groundbreaking or nothing. Like it's that moment, with that shot, that picture, and or it's not really, or it's a huge milestone anniversary, or you're a huge business. But small business tends to fall by the wayside. And for me, that's a problem. I grew up hearing business stories and like fascinating business stories. And sometimes they were, the businesses that were huge, and sometimes they were these small little, and everyone knows one, right? One of those small businesses down a strange street in your town where, they do something that's just absolutely cool and crazy. And you're like, really? Like
Yeah.
that's in Green Bay, Northeast Wisconsin makes that, and everyone has one of those. And those were getting shortchanged. So there's no shortage of stories. One of the questions I always get asked is how you find content. We have no problem finding content. I mean, every 2 weeks we fill 40 pages and we're busting at the seams. And if my editor, like if I would let her, she would run rampant and she would have, something even more massive than that. Like there's no shortage of content. So, I saw this as a problem I was well positioned to solve. And the business news was a vehicle that had been around for almost 18 years at that point.
Hmm.
So it's over 20 now. Yay.
Yeah.
um, been around for, about 18 at the time. And for me, it was the place I wanted in the market. It wasn't the exact publication I wanted. And I'll kind of finesse that. But that market position at the time was really valuable, that kind of brand and this history of having integrity. They were really well known for keeping editorial and advertising completely separate.
Hmm.
Just something I believe in very strongly, keeping those two things separate. I always say I work in the economy of good ideas. So if you have a great idea or a great story, that's editorial. You don't have to advertise with us to get editorial in the paper. And if you advertise with us, it doesn't mean we'll do a story on you. It has to be newsworthy and it has to be of interest to our audience. But there were a couple things that it needed some finesse. So early on, this was the strategy was to take something that had been operating really well for 18 years with no staff.
Wow.
Literally, the only person who was staff was the owner. Everybody else, including the editor, was contract. They put together none of their own design work. So all of that
Wow.
happened out of house. They had really almost no digital footprint, no social media. They were kind of this strange, well-kept secret. And the nature of having no staff is, if everybody is freelance, when you go to events and things, you're not leading with, "Hi, I'm so and so with the business news."
Right.
you're leading with, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm writing something for the business, which is a much harder kind of
Sure.
connection to start drawing. So first we added staff. And that editor choice was one of those that, you think of sometimes those make it or break it moments for your business. And I knew she was good. And you can, when it's a really good thing, you can feel it, like there's
Yeah.
energy around it. Like I knew it was good. I had no idea how good, which is like a happy accident. But within 2 issues of her coming on board, I got COVID. Um, so really bad COVID too. Like my son and I both had 104-degree fevers.
Oh boy.
And I remember calling her the morning before the paper had to go out and saying, I have never experienced this before. I actually can't see. So I actually literally, when I would put my glasses on, I couldn't see.
Oh wow.
Like the fever or something was doing something. And I said, I don't think I can design this paper, because we had pulled design and everything in-house too, because I knew how to do InDesign. Fun fact from working for Demi, sending all those digital books.
Yeah.
Um, I had pulled everything in-house. I'm like, I don't know how to do it. And she had never used InDesign before. And in less than 12 hours, she taught herself how to use InDesign, put together the entire paper, and got it out while I was an absolute like lump, in my bed. I was horribly useless and couldn't see. And you can ask so many questions in an interview that can get at the character of a person, and you get inklings at these.
Yeah.
I don't know what question I could have asked that would have told me I had one of those people with me. But it's one of those from that moment, she has my undying, support and
Yeah.
and everything. But even in that first interview, I remember her hitting on a few things that were really important. One was, I handed her the paper and I said, imagine something in this place in the market, that's serving, businesses, that's representing 12 counties at the time, all of this, but that it doesn't have to look just like this.
Hmm.
Can you kind of imagine like what it could be, what you could do? And she immediately was off to the races, starting to think about all the things that she could do with it, which was really cool. I mean, and just basic, it's funny now, she'll be very blunt with me about things, but first meeting, she was like, well, how would you feel about if I did this? I'm like, yeah, it's your paper, go do it. She's like, seriously? I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm hiring you to do. Because I was, raised that you find somebody really good who's exceptional and you let them run. Occasionally you have to rein in people, but let them run and do what they're best at. And this was an area she was going to be best at. But the other piece of it was, she made this offhanded comment that I've always taken to heart, which was, nobody can tell, I have them, but nobody can tell what my political affiliations are. I said, perfect, because that's not what our role is. Our role is to offer a whole bunch of pieces of information and, for you as the reader to think about. It's not to tell you what to think. That's not our role. Our role is to give you the tools so that you can make decisions. And her saying, hey, I don't put those in my writing, perfect, because it's really hard to unteach something like that. So built the staff, got the design pulled away from the printer and brought it in-house, which just, opened up possibilities for how it looked that were transformative. And then of course, digital. We needed a website. At the time, our website, and I'm really thankful it's not around anymore, because otherwise I'd probably go look. But it used to be literally a flippable PDF.
Wow.
And at the time, there was also this philosophy, which we don't do anymore, that what you would do is you would have the jump from page 1 going to page 36, because it was 36 pages at the time. So it goes right from the front to the back. And what this would do is it would draw you through the paper. But of course, all you have to do is like flip it over.
Right.
um, so for me, it was like, I don't know, shortest point between two,
Right.
flip it over. And but if you're doing this in a flippable PDF, it's like, okay, so hit the flip button 18 times, okay, and then finish that story. And if I want to go back and read the other one, I'm not going to flip it 18 times to go back to the front page so I can continue reading. Like it was one of the if we talk about UI UX, that was not even on that program's radar at that point. So having a digital presence, being able to share articles, before people were literally taking screen grabs with their phone or something so that they could
Sure.
people stories that they were in, which is we don't do that
Yeah.
anymore. You can share the articles. Um, and then you start putting together pieces of just who you are philosophically. So with the website was probably one of our first maybe line in the sand moments, which was we don't have a paywall on our website,
Mhm.
which is strange for a news organization.
Sure.
And this is where, that point about my Greek philosophy will like, wave its like ugly head for a moment, which is I believe, and so the paper believes in equitable access to news. And what that means is news content shouldn't be behind a paywall, because I believe in creating an informed community that has access to information, that is able to make decisions based on real-time information. And as part of that, if when you try to access an article and a thing pops up and says, hey, pay $1 for your first month or whatever, I mean, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but like, do you sign up if that happens? Like,
It drives me crazy.
have you ever subscribed?
I have not.
No. And that's what happens, right? So I firmly believe that, if you read the paper because you can access it, you're going to see how valuable we are. Because the other thing is the paywall also doesn't let you see how valuable our content is. And then secondly, if you're a business and you want to share this article about you, nobody can see it. So that does no benefit for you because as a business, it's this great story and nobody can see it. So the only pieces of our site that are actually behind a paywall are our non-news pieces. So like our special publications and things like that. and that I think is such a strange, most people find that very strange that we would do that. But I don't want to live in a society where people just go to Facebook for news because Facebook makes it easy to read news
Sure.
or to get a general idea. Or if you didn't read the article, there are 14 people who commented on it and have strong opinions. And now I'm going to create opinions based off of those 14 people. And that's not the way to consume information. Um, Plus, there's all of those kind of conversations about how, social media will put it through this echo chamber of validation
Right.
and there are kind of, other issues. But equitable access to news. Knowledge is important. And it used to be that news was thought about in this, and I think some still do. So I don't want to sound like I'm this unicorn. Thought of it as this public service, and that's the truth. We're here to provide information.
Yeah.
So we try to remove bias from it as much as we can. We actively tell everyone in the office to check us on our biases. I'm sure some get through, but anybody can check anybody else on something if they think that they're presenting a biased viewpoint of it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's actually really healthy for what we do.
Man, that was great. I mean, that was an excellent riff. I mean, I could tell you, I mean, clearly you're a fantastic storyteller, um, which is awesome. I mean, your reference to the groundbreaking and everything is something that I've said for years. It's fascinating how it's the thing behind the thing that's always so interesting. I used to relate it to like restaurants. You have that restaurant in your neighborhood. I'm in Chicago, so there's a lot of them in the Chicago area.
Mhm.
So, where you just go past it every day. It's a taco joint, is a taco joint, is a taco joint. And you have this perception in your head of what that is. And then someone talks about, the family gets the tomatoes from here and their ingredients are blah, blah, blah. And then you're like,
Mhm.
whoa, what have I been missing? And then you go in there and now it's not just another, fill in the blank. And
Oh, no.
it's,
Yeah.
even hearing you just go through your story, I mean, you're a fantastic storyteller in the way that you provide insight into your philosophies and doing everything. That is what makes your business so interesting. And the result of that obviously is remarkable content. But without those stories and having good storytellers behind those stories, all the good stuff is missed.
Well, and I think even to kind of a point that you made, sometimes questions around print media, because
Yeah,
we're obviously print, and it's not that we're not digital, but we're kind of print first and then
sure.
digital. And I always say the trick really is just to make sure that you treat print like print and digital like digital, because I think most of the confusion happens when you try to treat each medium like it's one or the other. But we had an instance where there was a grand opening for a business. And if you're an on-air news, and no fault, it's just part of the media, like the actual medium, you have like 30 seconds to maybe a minute
Sure.
30 tell a story. I mean, it is such a short, like it is
Yeah.
fast. And 30 seconds is, I mean, gone.
Right.
And we covered the same business opening. And what we were able to talk about, because we had more time, was one of maybe the cool, like I guess I still get goosebumps when I talk about the story. It was one of the coolest things because I learned so many things from this story. So it's a woman who had opened it is still open, a boba tea shop in Appleton.
Yeah, sure.
And actually, have I told you this story? I might have told you this
No, you
story.
have not.
And so she originally is from China, moved here on a student visa. And while she was here, a situation changed and she wasn't able to kind of cover her education the same way. And with a student visa, you actually can't work.
Hmm.
So, but what she did have is she had a green card. And a thing that you can do with that is you can join the US military, which I did
Wow.
not know. So she joined the US military and also didn't know this. After a year of being in the US military, you can become a naturalized citizen.
Oh, wow.
So she joined the US military and was working as a behavioral health specialist for soldiers in Afghanistan. And then after a year became a naturalized citizen, moved back and was able to finish out her education. For a while, she was working with students with autism, actually. And then during the pandemic, there were issues with like trying to force them into wearing masks, which you can't do, and certain things. And so, and I actually don't remember if the business closed down or if she just had to leave with something like that. So she ended up going back to school and opening this boba tea shop. And like I learned so much from that, and she was so fascinating. How would you have covered that in 30 seconds? I genuinely like I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you were talking at the speed of light, I don't know how you would have covered that. And those are the supremely interesting individuals that like we want here. We want those people who are creative thinkers, who are innovative, who are starting businesses, who are entrepreneurial minded, who are community minded, because she's super active in the community too. You know, those are the people we want here. When we say talent attraction and retention, I mean, those are the people that if you talk about them, you understand, you know, some of the really cool things that can come out of that retention, that
Yeah.
attraction. She stayed here. I mean, in theory, could have gone anywhere.
Sure.
Open a
Sure.
business here. In theory, could have been anywhere. You know, and is it easy to open a boba tea shop in Appleton? You know, probably not as easy as a big metropolitan place, you know? And something about, you know, she stayed, which is really cool.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating story. I learned like a lot of things I hadn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I especially don't know when they would have come up in conversation before, but I had known it was really fascinating. And that's a cool thing too, when you get to tell all of these people's stories. We always say, our like internal phrase that we have is let the curiosity win. So the idea is, you know, when you are, you know, faced with a new moment or a new experience, you know, leading with the curiosity and trying to understand it and trying to find out more information. But when you're leading with interest and curiosity and what can I find out, you know, you're really open to whatever people are willing to share it with you. It really does, I think, transform just any interaction.
Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, and again, it's one of those things I've had a bunch of questions for you. You've hit them all. Just it, and the reason I like what you just did there, I think that you broke it down, but there's a sense of just your passion for what you do and an understanding for your role in the space that is refreshing. You know, and I
Yeah.
love the way that you're thinking about things outside the box. You know, the paywall is a big one. I mean, I love that approach. I think it's the smart approach. I mean, there's been articles where I've wanted to read, like really wanted to read, and a paywall will come up, and I'm like, scrap that. You know, and you're right. That's a miss because maybe I share that. Maybe I spread the word about the publication. It's very interesting. It'll be really fun to watch how you kind of innovate with this publication as you continue to grow.
Well, I think one of the other differences too is that we framed our end users a little different. You know, you think about the end user for most newspapers, and it's kind of a general public, and you can't get super specific in who that person is because, It could be anyone from, a fourth grade class, on an assignment and practicing with the newspaper, to your grandma still really desperately wants to receive the daily paper every day, to maybe it goes to your business, maybe you pick it up in a waiting room, you know, it's a whole host of places that it could meet you. We're a business newspaper. 98% of our papers go to businesses.
Mhm.
So our end user, we have the benefit of knowing, like, it's not general public, it is a business owner. That is who we're creating information for. So what that enables us to do is refocus kind of our maybe array of services in this view of not just how do I put out the news,
Mhm.
but how do I create a system of resources around a business professional so that they can do what they do best and have the best information at the time. So what I mean by that, so the newspaper is maybe in that kind of direct, obvious one, and then I'll move to less obvious. But the newspaper, here's information. So as you're out in the business world, here's information about your community, about your region. Here are things that are going to enable you to get a better idea of the lay of the landscape and make more informed business decisions. Here's the news. Then we have our book of lists, which is our annual book of lists, which is, I
Yep.
mean, I'm an Excel spreadsheet junkie. So for me, it's one of the coolest things on the planet. But it's literally lists. It's from largest law firms, CPA firms, economic impact of tourism based on county, all of these really cool kind of lists. And that enables you to make kind of some of these more strategic business decisions or reference-based decisions. Hey, I need a new CPA, and maybe I, really loved this person, but they moved, or maybe I'm not happy with my CPA firm,
Mhm.
and I want to look for somebody else. You know, in this, you can look it up and you literally see, okay, where are they based? What do they specialize in? How do I get in contact with them? Is this very tactical resource
Yeah.
um, for changes that you might want to make for your business? Or we also have largest breweries and most difficult golf courses. So maybe there's some leisure
That's
time there
awesome.
too. But even things like hotels, meeting facilities, you think about, so if somebody's visiting from out of town, where can I take them? Um, so those kind of things. And then the other piece is something that we've built actually that was brand new last year called the New Business Review.
Mhm.
And the New Business Review, I always say, was born out of an observation and a frustration. Um, Occasionally, my personal biases come out. I try to call them out when they do, but
Yeah.
this one I know I have. And in some of those early business discussions that I kind of referenced, I remember hearing things like, we're having this problem where we're trying to think through this thing. We should go to Chicago and see what they're
Yeah.
doing. Or actually, the first one I heard was Portland. Oh, we should go to
Gotcha.
Portland and see what they're doing. We should go to New York. We should go to, whatever big city. And I remember my philosophy training creeps up at strange points. So what I learned in philosophy, among many other things that I will not bore you with, is how A and not A are more closely related than A and B. So, and what that means is the thing and its opposite are most closely related than something and something else. So if somebody says, hey, I have this problem, I want to go elsewhere, my natural inclination is, well, what does that mean that you're saying about what's here? Like, what's that opposite? That opposite is, almost by saying we need to go elsewhere, what you're saying is here's not good enough for what I need. And for me, I had talked to so many really cool, vibrant business leaders. I mean, not even all, CEOs, but people
Yeah.
managerial level, like really interesting people. And they show that there's no shortage of innovation. There's no shortage of strategic thinking and problem solving. So what was it that was causing these people to say, we don't have it here, we need to go elsewhere? And for me, as I started kind of threading through, I realized it's sometimes a problem of access. So those people might be here, they might be thinking about things, but how would you know?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times internal strategy with a business, you would have no way of knowing. Or, if a business is particularly strategic or innovative in a certain area, it might be known in the industry, but it might not be known more broadly. Um, so then it becomes a problem of access. So where you might access would be maybe things like somebody posts something on LinkedIn. Well, that
Yep.
has an interesting bias because of course you're going to say, hello, I'm amazing and wonderful and I'm strategic. Look at this thing I just did. Or a website or a white paper or something like that. And all of those have an inherent bias. And having come from this area of academia and academic journals being something that were particularly prevalent, I had this idea of what if we had something that was an interesting blend between an academic journal and a business publication. So something that was geared around leveraging local regional thought leaders, business leaders, community leaders, but people who have something important to say or something that they're working on, and focus them around certain themes and let them just share what they're working on to this broader audience. And so for our first year, we did 4 of them. And so it's now quarterly. And I think of each one as this almost expanding circles of influence. So our Q1 is usually something that's more reflexive. So as a leader, what are things I should be thinking about? Our Q2 is what should I think about internal to my business? Q3 is what do I think about kind of amidst my industry? And Q4 is like, hey, here's the market. Like, here's what we should think about just generally. And the types of articles that we've been able to get, we write none of them. They're all written by those thought leaders. Everything from, we had Corey from a company called Synthetic, and Synthetic is absolutely fascinating. Do you remember those Chinese weather balloons?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. He was able to use his rapid sorting AI technology to find the origin of these Chinese weather balloons.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
And he did it before the government.
That's crazy.
So then also you become very popular because all the government wants to talk to you. But
So where are they out of? Where's that company out of?
So he I think actually lives in Texas. His business is one of the Titletown tech businesses.
Oh wow, no kidding.
So it's kind of invested in locally, and so he's been
Very cool.
He comes from National Geographic originally too, which is really interesting. So he was able to do a piece, and then one of my favorite ones was actually Sachin from Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry did a piece, and this was in our technology and evolution issue.
Yeah.
He was talking about manufacturing and the evolution of technology and how manufacturing.
You froze up on me a little bit.
Oh, let me see. You froze for me too. Oh, are we back?
I got you back. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the aluminum guy.
Yeah, I was talking about in our technology and evolution issue, was talking about manufacturing and evolution in technology and how certain pieces of manufacturing run the risk that as technology continues to evolve and advance, those become completely obsolete. And one of the kind of phrases he had in this, and it's funny, I remember it specifically, was, quite soberingly, we must prepare for a moment when we are irrelevant. And I remember reading this and saying, like, so many CEOs think about things like that. Like, what do I do if my industry starts approaching irrelevancy? And it's something that, I mean, is there a publication you go to where someone's openly talking about this fear of being irrelevant and having to think about it and having to really grapple with it on a daily basis and have to think around it and have to innovate around it and recognizing that you might be in an industry that's not here, or not here in the same way in 30 years. And having a space as a leader to be a little vulnerable and to see other leaders being like that, that was one of the moments where like, this is some of the powerful nature of what this kind of publication can do. So I realized I went back. So I'm going to peel us right back to that first part, which is, for an end user who's a business person, this is an ideation and strategy bucket. So now it's, what other ideas are out there in the community that I'm part of? What types of problems are people trying to think through? What bits of strategy, are conventional? And do I agree with those or not? It creates a space for you to intellectually grapple with, other businesses, other community members in a way that's, maybe you find something for your business that you're like, oh yes, I absolutely want to do that. And maybe you find something that you're like, probably works for them, might not work for me, but I appreciate that somebody's doing something with it to just, that's not for me. Which it's fine. We have all of those things. Early on, one of the things I was asked was, would you have 2 articles in it that disagree with one another? To which I said, absolutely. Absolutely, I would have 2 articles who disagree with one another. I have no problem with that. That's perfectly fine. But in seeing the business owner or the entrepreneur or, a young professional or, just a really awesome business, professional in their career, and thinking about what are the tools we can give them. I think that allows us to do a few things that are unexpected
Yeah.
in news publication, because it's not just anyone who reads the business news. And because we know who's reading it, we can do a little bit more.
Gosh, that's amazing. It's just awesome listening to hear. I get excited from your excitement. It's one of those things when you see someone building, it's you can tell you're excited not only about what you've built, but where it's going. But more important than that, I think it's just, when I listen to people talk, and I talk to a lot of people, whether it's interviews or just in business in general, and usually there's always a little something missing. Not always, but a lot of times, and it's that purpose, right? That people call it that why or whatever. And when I talk to someone like you, it's just clear that you've got a very clear path. Your background is super interesting, and you're doing things based on things that you've identified as a need in the market, and it's man, it's exciting. I'm so excited for you guys. It's very cool.
Oh, thank you. What I'll say though that's maybe interesting is, I got into the paper to solve a problem. And a lot of times, if you're just a problem solver, once the problem is solved, where do you go? What do you do? Because if your mission was to do one thing and you feel like you've done that thing, like what's next? And I'll say it was an interesting moment, and I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but I went into owning the business news with one mentality, like, hey, there's a problem. I want to solve this problem. To, shifting and really thinking like, this is much more ingrained in all of the things I've done before than I ever thought. And I think about the ways that my background in language has become relevant, the ways that, my philosophy has become relevant, the ways that my business kind of history has become relevant. Chemistry has never really come up. But otherwise, it ended up feeling much more natural, and I'm much more passionate about it than I was even those first, maybe even the first year, just because now I've found like it's not just to solve a problem. Now we've transformed from problem solvers to people who are going to create value. And value creation doesn't have an endpoint. It's not like, yep, that's it. I've hit as much value as I feel like giving out today. Thank you. It's different. But I think that transformation, that was important. And that's part of why, if you had had this conversation with me a few years ago, you might not have felt that same sense of purpose, because I don't know that it was there beyond, hey, I see a problem I want to fix. But I think if you start with a problem and you start with that curiosity and you start with just wanting to understand and do more and see what you can bring, and then you leverage the unique skill sets that you have, like you can get to really interesting places. Um, but I don't know that I started there. So I'm glad you're getting.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, that's man, it's just and what a great way to phrase it. It's just it's I love when people take on things that when I first met you, and you're this obviously very very intelligent person that's taken over this paper. It is one of those things where, I mean, it hits on the nail, kind of what you were speaking of before. It's like, what's the story here? What's going on with this Megan girl? And it's just been God, this has been great just hearing your story and listening to you. I mean, I could talk to you forever. As we
And
as
we've
we
expanded
progress,
recently too. Yeah.
man, yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I'm going to want to talk to you again at some point for sure as you guys progress, because I have so many other questions. I want to respect your time here, but that was, man, the way that you explain it and what you guys are doing, the path that you are on when it comes to, not only print. It almost seems like the print side of it is, it's the product is what you guys are putting out there, but everything that goes into that and the value and your focus on creating value, man, it's very exciting to watch.
Yeah, I will say print still has a place. So often, it gets, people like digital. There's a certitude sometimes with digital, or the illusion of it. It's like,
Sure.
well, I know how many clicks and I know all this engagement, which is wonderful. There is a place for digital. There's something still magical about print. And, I know I'm not the only one. Like, I still get the Wall Street Journal, and I get Barron's, and I get the hard copies.
Yeah.
And I get excited about that. I genuinely do. And so many people I talk to love that there's a physical version of the paper. And I don't want to out my team, but when we got the new business review literally an hour ago, the first thing they all did was smell it. And you engage with print a little differently. There's a stickiness. They also talk about how you absorb less information when you're reading it on a screen, when you're reading it digitally. There's something to be said of taking a moment and engaging with something that's static, and maybe you're having a cup of coffee with it, or something harder if that's your ilk, and just taking a moment to read the news. I think sometimes we have this, like, I have those moments of nostalgia where my favorite mornings are the ones where I get up early and my family, we have breakfast together and I have a cup of coffee and I read the paper. There's something about that feels very, that warm, nostalgic kind of feeling. There's a place for it. And there's this pushback to local, there's a pushback to print that's really interesting. And trends that you want to monitor, to make sure that they're still happening. But if nothing else, that pushback to local is there. And it's because, as publications get bigger and broader, it's hard to create meaning for the individual anymore. So, as I kind of quickly mentioned, we expanded recently. So we actually cover 43 counties now. So I mentioned 12 at the
Yeah.
start of the story, and it's now 43. But we have 3 papers. We didn't try to make one Wisconsin business news newspaper. We said, hey, we recognize that Northeast Wisconsin and West Central Wisconsin, like Eau Claire area, are not the same thing. And that if we tried to treat them the same, it does a disservice to both. And we have North Central, and it's the same philosophy. North Central is different than West Central. It's
Yeah.
Wausau area. It's not Eau Claire, and it's not Green Bay. It is its own thing. So in letting things be unique and be local and be individual, that's part of why I think people have been really interested in the paper. It is very local news. All of us live locally. All of us are, we're from here. I mean, my editor's from, North Central, and actually one of the staff writers. So whenever she has to do a story over there, she just visits her family over the weekend. And I think they might like me more now. Like, we see her so much.
Yeah.
Like, well, but really that belief in local. When you pick up a paper, you want to be able to see what's happening locally. There are plenty of other places to read national and global. We don't need to fill that niche. So.
Gosh, that's so good. That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for carving out the time. This was amazing. I'm going to
Thank
want to
you.
talk to you again because I could go on forever. I really could. I'm so excited for what you guys are doing for your journey, and it's going to be very interesting to watch as you continue to grow this in the next chapter. It'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I will say too, I'm one of those people, I genuinely love feedback. So, if you ever have feedback at the end of every meeting, I ask for questions, comments, concerns, insults. And and I truly I like feedback. I think about how much growth you can have if you're not afraid to listen to somebody else's viewpoint. And some of my best kind of things that we've been able to do and move and provide and value is because somebody said something. Hey, I like this better than I like that. Or when you covered this, it really resonated with, my business, my community. Or why did you do that? Which usually we get, not something we get all the time, but that feedback is so important. So just, I appreciate the time. It was really kind of you to reach out and want to talk to me. I love what I do, and I love having the opportunity to share it. And one of my favorite things about what we do is that, the paper has our name at the top, but pretty much nothing in the paper is about us. It's all about other businesses, other community members, and we just get to share the really cool things that are happening here, because there's some really cool things happening in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's awesome. Well, thanks for your time. This has been great, and we'll definitely have to catch up again. And when I'm up the next time, I'll have to buy you lunch.
Oh, sounds good. Or I can, it's whatever.
Yeah.
We do have some good places. Yeah. So,
No, that
and
was great, Megan.
from the paper, I have so many recommendations for food. It's not
There you go.
even-
Well, I love it, and just want to say thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was
Yeah.
great.